Hello, welcome to This Family Does Everything. My name is Alexandria, and this is a video on the trial of Letitia Stauch. It's recently just began after a lot of delays caused by Letitia. So let's sit back, watch, and analyze the Letitia Stauch trial.
The jury has returned to the courtroom. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. When we took our recess, I told you that we would start with opening statements at this point in time. And that's where we will begin. Again, remember that nothing that the attorneys say is evidence. This is this is sort of an overview of what they believe the evidence will show. With that, prosecution. Go ahead.
Oh, I was asking to turn.
You want it now? Go ahead. Okay.
And if you want to dim the lights, I'm fine.
I can't, actually, I thought this was for perimeter lights like it is in my courtroom, but it's not. Their panel is up there. If you want to dim the perimeter lights, it's up to you. Okay, all right.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, here we go. Paramount question you will have to answer as jurors in this case has to do with sanity, specifically the defendant's sanity. At the conclusion of the evidence, the court will give you jury instructions. One specific jury instruction will talk specifically about insanity. It will read that as to the question of sanity, the defendant was insane at the time of the commission of the acts if she was so diseased or defective in mind at the time of the commission of the acts as to be incapable of distinguishing right from wrong with respect to that act, or she suffered from a condition of mind caused by a mental disease or defect that prevented her from forming a culpable mental state. That is an essential element of a crime charge. A culpable mental state is like an intentionally or knowingly. Evidence in this case will show that she could distinguish between right and wrong, and that she was absolutely capable of forming the specific intent required for these charges. Those instructions will go on to give specific guidance on what qualifies as a mental disease or defect. It says care should not be taken to confuse mental disease or defect with moral obliquity, mental depravity, passion growing out of anger, revenge, or hatred, or other motives and kindred evil conditions. Because when an act is induced by any of these causes, the ones that I just listed, the person is accountable to the law, meaning that person can be found guilty for committing crimes charged. You should consider the evidence you will hear in this case in context with that instruction. This case is about two people. First is Gannon Jacob Stauch, an 11-year-old little boy, came into this world premature, weighing just 1 pound 6 ounces. He proved to be a fighter, overcame the difficulties associated with being born so small. He's survived by his mother, Landon Hyatt, his father, Al Stauch, and his precocious little sister, Lena. On January 26, 2020, something bad happened inside the Stauch family home. Gannon suffered some burns. You'll learn this from a video recording this defendant made that night, January 26th. You'll hear her as she manipulated Gannon, putting guilt on him for some mistake that a child made. And in that recording, you'll hear Gannon say in his own words, "I'm just worried about my burns."
I just don't know what to do.
Well, devastating. Initially, Scott, I can't lie when the TMZ information.
Gannon, I promise this is the last time I'm gonna ask you. I'm just freaked out, okay? Are you sure you didn't do it on purpose? Okay, we promise. You promise. Pinky promise. Okay, all right, so listen. We're gonna have to sell stuff to fix it. Okay? So we figure out what we gotta sell. We can sell the sofa, we can sell whatever, because we gotta get it fixed. So lady, don't be mad at us and kick us out of the house. Okay? You got it? You got it?
I'm just worried about my friend.
Okay, shh, listen. So tomorrow,
The other person in this case is that last voice you just heard, who said so tomorrow. lady sitting right here, the defendant. January 26, 2020 and into January 27, 2020, she was the sole provider for Gannon. Her husband, Al Stauch, Gannon's father, serves in the National Guard. He was in Oklahoma for National Guard training, left that Saturday night, the 25th. Everything that happened to Gannon from that point forward was her decision. She carried out actions to kill Gannon, to put his body in a suitcase and hide it, to hide evidence of what she did to Gannon. Told numerous stories to investigators to manipulate the course of the investigation. And finally, to discard Gannon inside that suitcase off of a Florida bridge like garbage. January 27, 2020, Gannon's home, located at 6627 Mandan Drive, here in Colorado Springs, Colorado, turned into the stuff of nightmares. In fact, the one place a little boy like Gannon should have felt the safest, his bedroom, turned into, like I said, the stuff of nightmares. That bedroom is in fact where he was brutally murdered. The defendant attacked him viciously, mercilessly, deliberately, and intentionally. These are exhibits that you'll see from the doctor down in Florida, Dr. Ignacio, when she performed the autopsy. He'll tell you that Gannon suffered 18 stab wounds to his body, his chest, his back, his head, and most importantly, his arms and his hands. Why is that important? Gannon was fighting for his life, and those were defensive wounds. Next came a crushing blow to his head that was so strong, it fractured his skull like an eggshell. That wasn't enough for this defendant. He retrieved a 9mm handgun, fired it at Gannon 3 times. 2 bullets struck the pillow near him and were caught in the fibers of that pillow. That 3rd bullet entered his jaw, traveled through his head, fracturing his mandible, his vertebrae, hitting his spinal cord, and lodged in the back of his head and was recovered at autopsy. Gannon's life drained from his body, drop by drop. The photo that's on the screen right now is a picture of his bedroom. Same corner where he was in that picture, or where you'll see him in the picture in the bed. Each one of those markers signifies a small blood drop that splattered across his wall. It ran down the corner of his mattress, soaked through the carpet padding, and puddled on the concrete foundation below that carpet. The defendant then took very deliberate action. She decided to hide her crimes from the world, and she took action to hide those crimes from the world. She collected Gannon's bloody and broken body and the blankets and pillow that were near him and shoved them into a suitcase and hid them in the storage unit in that basement. That basement storage unit is right around the corner from Gannon's bedroom. What she didn't know is that she was leaving clues behind in that storage room. That plastic tub that you see in the bottom left portion of that picture has Gannon's blood on it. There was an Amazon box in that storage room that has Gannon's blood on it. The concrete floor in that storage room had Gannon's blood on it. The defendant next decided to clean Gannon's room. Deliberately, intentionally, knowing what she was doing. She scrubbed the walls, cleaning them off. She scrubbed the carpet with scrub brushes that were later found in the dishwasher. Those scrub brushes have carpet fibers in them. They have blood on them. They have Gannon's DNA on them. This is Gannon's bedroom when members of the El Paso County Sheriff's Office first came to the house on January 27th in the evening hours. This is what it looked like. No obvious signs of a struggle. No obvious signs of blood as they walked through the house and through Gannon's bedroom. There were no obvious signs of a struggle or a murder because the defendant had cleaned them up. And also realized she had Gannon's blood on her person. Clothes that she was wearing, likely containing Gannon's blood, based off of how much blood had hit the walls, were never found. Her clothing was never found. These shoes, the defendant's shoes, were found on the washing machine, drying. That reddish rust color that you can see on the soles, Gannon's blood and DNA were found on those shoes. You can see just how much blood she was walking through as she was cleaning up that mess. Took more deliberate action. She collected and discarded other important clues. I mentioned she stabbed Gannon 18 times. The instrument that she used to stab Gannon has never been found. That 9mm handgun that she used to fire 3 rounds at Gannon, shell casing ejected out of that firearm each time she pulled the trigger. No shell casing was ever found in Gannon's room. She then took more deliberate action when she hid Gannon in a suitcase, first in her car, and then up north near the El Paso County, Douglas County line. GPS location data was used to track her locations or her movements. And it led to another grisly discovery up just in this area here. A board was found under a tree. That board had Gannon's blood on it. This is miles away from the Stauch family home, which is in the southeast part of the city, close to the airport. You'll learn through testimony that this board came from the Stauch family garage. Then took more deliberate and thoughtful action. She loaded the suitcase containing Gannon into the back of a rented van and drove to Florida. And that's the course of her travels from here to Florida. She rented a hotel room in Pensacola, Florida on February 4th, 2020. She drove a short distance from that hotel room, which is sort of by those blue angular marks on the map, up to where that red square is on the map. Drove a short distance from that hotel room, across a dark bridge that drives over a river that flows into the Gulf of Mexico. There she acted with determined purpose. Stopped that van. She hauled the suitcase out of the back of that van, drug it to the side of the road, hoisted it up over the railing, pushed it over the side, hoping that Gannon would never be found. 48 days later, 1,300 miles away from where Gannon was murdered, the search for answers and Gannon's remains finally ended on March 17th, 2020, when the suitcase that came from that basement storage room, Gannon's remains, blankets, and the pillow were found by an unlucky bridge worker checking that bridge for safety. And imagine the shock that he felt when he realized what was inside that suitcase. Inside that suitcase, obviously Gannon's decomposing remains. Also, these 2 blankets and that pillow. Remember the pictures that I showed just a moment ago of Gannon in bed? These pictures were taken by this defendant on the morning of January 27, 2020. Sent them by text message to Gannon's father, Al, who was in Oklahoma for training. Take note of those blankets. Take note of the blankets that were recovered from that suitcase. The very same blankets and pillow that were in those pictures on January 27, 2020 were found 1,300 miles away with Gannon underneath that bridge. The defendant then purposely, intentionally came up with numerous different stories about what had happened. Gannon was missing, went to a friend's house and never returned. Gannon was kidnapped and she was raped by a guy named Eduardo. Gannon was kidnapped and she was raped, but this time by a guy named Quincy Brown. She went to look for a bike up near that Douglas County, El Paso County line. Gannon test rode that bike, crashed, and suffered a horrible head injury. And a guy named Quincy Brown takes Gannon, and now the defendant doesn't know where Gannon is. Cartels were somehow involved with Gannon's disappearance. And most cruelly, that Landon Hyatt, Gannon's mother, was involved with Gannon's disappearance. All of her actions were purposely designed by her to distance herself from what she did. throw off investigators, buy her time, escape accountability for what she did to Gannon on January 27, 2020. At the conclusion of the evidence that we'll be presenting in this case, you'll be asked to determine whether the defendant is guilty or not guilty of the charges that we've leveled against her. You'll also be asked to determine whether she was sane or insane at the time that she killed Gannon. All of her decisions, all of her deliberate actions betray her claims of insanity. She knew that what she had done to Gannon was wrong. Why hide it? You'll hear her own voice through recorded phone calls and interviews. The evidence itself will prove her sanity. As jurors, part of your job will be to determine how much credibility, if any, you give to the witnesses. That same rule applies to expert witnesses. You'll get to hear from doctors. You'll get to hear from GPS expert witnesses. Lawyers get tongue-tied sometimes. And when they take the stand and take an oath, you get to judge whether what they are saying makes sense. Is it credible or not? And if it's not credible, you get to discard it. If it's credible, you can use it in your deliberations, but you all get to decide whether that credibility extends to that witness or not. The same will hold true for our expert witnesses and the defense expert witnesses. Get to hear from a doctor that will testify that the defendant was insane at the time of the murder of Gannon Stauch on January 27, 2020. With all expert witnesses, you should gauge what they're saying, measure it against the other evidence that you're hearing. Does it make sense or not? Like all expert witnesses, if it doesn't make sense, you can discard it. You'll also hear from others who knew her best. People that have the best opportunity to see how she was acting. Did she understand the difference between right and wrong? Could she form intent? People like Al Stauch, the man who was married to her. People like her brother, Dakota Lowry, who flew out here after Gannon went missing. And most importantly, her very own daughter, Harley Hunt. See, Harley Hunt was in the best position to know the defendant's state of mind, especially as it relates to when this crime occurred. She was the only other older person in the house. When Al left to Oklahoma, Harley Hunt was working. She's young, 17 years old at the time, thinking about going into the Air Force. But she becomes the defendant's closest confidant after the defendant killed Gannon Stauch. In fact, she also rode with the defendant on that van ride from Colorado Springs to Florida. She'll be able to tell you in her own words whether the defendant understood the difference between right and wrong, whether she could act intentionally or deliberately or not. And she'll tell you that she could on both counts. Remember, this case is about two people. Gannon had no choice what happened to him that day on January 27th. The other, this defendant, she held every single decision in her hands. She took deliberate, thoughtful actions that ended a precious life and tore a family apart. Your job as jurors will be to listen intently to all of the evidence. Because even the most mundane evidence, it might seem inconsequential when you're listening, is being given to you purposely so that you can make the determinations you need to make as jurors. Did she understand the difference between right and wrong? Was she able to form a culpable mental state? Every single piece of evidence that comes from this chair will be used by you to make that determination. The next time I get to talk with you directly the way I'm doing right now, that'll mean we've concluded evidence and we're giving closing arguments. At that time, both sides will get to ask you to make determinations based on what you all have heard. We're going to ask you to hold us to our burden of proof. The criminal justice system doesn't work if you don't hold us to our burden of proof. Our burden of proof is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The things we have to prove are the elements of the crimes charged. We also have to disprove that the defendant is insane, meaning essentially we have to prove that she was sane. The evidence will do that for you. We will ask you to give justice to Gannon Stauch. We will ask you to find this defendant guilty for what she did to him more than 3 years ago. We'll ask you to find her guilty of murder in the first degree. Murder in the first degree of a child under 12 years of age. Tampering with a deceased human body for taking Gannon's body from that scene and transporting it across the country. And tampering with physical evidence. We'll ask you to convict her on each and every one of those charges. And the evidence will guide you towards those convictions. On January 27, 2020, 6:55 p.m., the defendant herself called 911. She called 911 to report that Gannon was missing and not come home. Call taker you'll hear ask the defendant, who was the last person to see Gannon?
Who was the last person to see him? I guess me?
The evidence will show that she was the last person to see Gannon alive. The evidence will show that she was sane on January 27, 2020, when she ended Gannon's life. The evidence will show that she acted intentionally and deliberately when she took Gannon's life. And then we will ask you to convict her. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Defense? Mr. Cook?
Good afternoon, members of the jury. I talked to some of you during jury selection over the last couple of weeks. To some of you, I want to reintroduce myself. My name is Will Cook. I, along with Mr. Tellini, represent Letitia Stauch. Now, this is a very tough case. We looked at the jury questionnaires, prosecution. There was a lot of strong feelings. Questionnaires. Have you formed an opinion about Ms. Stauch? Had a lot of she's guilty. Had a few she's evil. People forming opinions about this case before they ever hear one shred of evidence. As a defense attorney in this case is very worrisome when people have come in and they have preconceived notions of what's going on. With respect to the question on the paperwork that you got about insanity, what do you think about insanity? Is it valid? Something that's legitimate. A lot of people said insanity is just a way to get out of taking responsibility. It's an excuse. It doesn't exist. It's fake. Got a lot of that. So I, as the defense attorney, have two big problems in the case. I represent Ms. Stauch, who, according to a lot of jury questionnaires, is evil and guilty. And us raising insanity is a bunch of BS. A lot to deal with. Been looking at this case for going on 3 years now. All the photos, I've seen all the reports Mr. Tellini has. It's a lot. What you saw on the board this afternoon, that's the PG stuff, the rated G information, photos you're going to see. For a general audience, go forward in this case, you're going to see the autopsy photos. You're going to see the photos of when Gannon was brought out of the suitcase. And they're horrible. Horrible. It was an awful, awful thing that was done to Gannon. And I see Mr. Allen get up here and he's emotional, almost into tears talking about it. And I get it. I get it. What happened to that little 11-year-old boy is beyond description. The facts of this case. Awful. You know, it's so bad. This is a lost cause. Ladies and gentlemen, I can't quit. I can't leave this courtroom. Got to do my job in this case. Mr. Toledo does. I can't just, after that opening statement, all the information that I've seen, the photos, the smiling picture of Gannon, hearing about him being shot and stabbed multiple times. Hundreds of witnesses and 800 pieces of evidence that are going to come in. I can't check out now and just sit down and write this out. I can't do it because it wouldn't be fair. Wouldn't be fair to the court system, the process, and it wouldn't be fair to Ms. Stauch. And I know people will say, well, who gives a shit about what's fair for Ms. Stauch? The court systems do. The law does. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights. The war fought over these things that we're dealing with today. Old school laws, presumption of innocence, right to remain silent, stuff that comes all the way back from old Boston and Paul Revere riding through the streets on his horse going, the British are coming, the British are coming. Old stuff, and it matters. And once we decide something in the media, before you have heard one shred of evidence, prejudge this case before anything has taken place, then all of that is lost. And we are truly a country that is no longer ruled by law, but by the media. I get it, we've lost. Mr. Toledo, we lost. Stauch, we lost. We have lost in the court of public opinion and the media. He's guilty. I get that. This is a court of law. As Judge Werner said, come through those double doors there. This is a special place. This isn't the media. This isn't Facebook. Wash all of that away. Don't try to get up and walk out of the courtroom before you started. Do your jobs. Listen to the evidence. When the evidence is complete, go back into the jury room and weigh the evidence. All I'm asking of you, just give us a fair shake. I can see it in your eyes, ladies and gentlemen. A lot of you, as far as you're concerned, I could burn in hell for representing Miss Stauch. A lot of you won't even make eye contact with me. I might as well just be the devil himself up here running his mouth. But I'm not. No different than those three at that table right there. Paid advocates. Werner here in voir dire says they are paid advocates. Leanie and I were paid advocates. They have their side of the story. And I just want to be heard. Want our side to be heard. And if at the end, guilty, but you weighed the evidence, you listened, you didn't prejudge the case, your biases, your sympathies, your prejudices that you had at the beginning of this trial, if you didn't let those come in, were fair and impartial, but it's still guilty, I'll take that. I'll take that in a case like this. A lot of evidence. Very, very difficult case. So don't quit on me. Now, Mr. Allen is right. He's a good attorney. He's well-spoken. He elected DA. This is going to come down to insanity. Maybe here. And was killed back in January 20. How do you figure that out? How do you look into the mind of a sick person and divine what they are thinking? Well, evidence, people's statements, observations, recorded statements, phone call, heard Ms. Stauch talking on. That's good stuff. What else can you look at? Motive? Somebody's motive. Remember that word? Up every day during jury selection for the past 2 weeks by the prosecution. Motive. You were told, and rightly so, by the prosecution that there is no requirement for the prosecution to prove motive. They're right. Does that mean that motive doesn't matter? No, it doesn't. Not mean that. Even though jury instruction talking about insanity, the prosecution just put up on the board, talked about Well, motive or lack of motive could be a sign that there is insanity or not insanity. And it's in the jury instruction there. So it does matter. It's not required, but it matters. And it matters because it's evidence. You don't have a motive, that goes to show a lack of evidence. Say there's a couple people involved in a shooting and a murder out in the community. Paper reports it as a random, senseless act of violence. One person shot to death. Police investigate. They have 3 people that are suspects that were there at the scene at the time of the shooting. One problem for the investigators, don't really have any other evidence. A week later, doing some good police work, they uncovered that one of the 3 people was a drug dealer who was ripped off the week before the shooting by the dead man. A lot of money and drugs were stolen. All of a sudden, with that information, this random, senseless act of violence becomes a murder with a motive. It does matter.
You need to put it up. It's not hooked up yet. You can turn off the perimeter lights if you want. I'm not getting the feed come through. You are hooked up to the defense. Still not coming through. Oh, there you go.
All right, we've got a photo here. We've got some familiar looking faces. Gannon, Letitia Stauch. Stepmom, stepson. Gannon's little sister in the back. Look at that. Looks like everybody's doing pretty good. Happy, sunny day. Maybe Miss Stauch is doing a selfie, holding the camera out. Whatever. When would have this photo been taken? The day before Gannon died. The day before he was killed. It wasn't a photo of evil, anger. A photo of someone, by all accounts, who was a loving stepmother. Care of Gannon. Gannon's father was on a deployment. Stauch worked as a teacher herself in the Whitefield School District, an elementary school teacher. Got a person that was, living, would seem like the American dream in a nice suburban house in Morrison Ranch, the suburbs of Colorado Springs, Colorado. But behind those photos and Miles, Stauch. Oh,
Yeah, I did.
okay. Stauch was hiding Stauch was dealing trauma and abuse that had been going on since she was a toddler. A troubled childhood. Mother wasn't really much of a mother. She had a line of stepdads or boyfriends or whatever. Her mother come in and out, come in and out, in and out, in and out of her life. From the time she was 3 or 4 years old, Miss Stauch, until she finally moved out. And she suffered. She suffered horrifically from these stepfathers, these boyfriends of her mother. Watched her mother get beat by the boyfriends, physically abused, till eventually the physical abuse these men reserved for her mother eventually trained on the Stauch here. Little girl. First, it was just physical beatings, whoopings, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, and then it became sexual, where she was molested regularly. Five or six until she was a teenager. Constant. She used to have to sleep in the car out in the driveway to get away, not have to be molested and sexually assaulted by these men. Sleep in the car in the driveway of her house. And because her mom wasn't around a lot, kind of an absentee mom, a lot of these stepfathers, if you could call them that, cared for Miss Stauch exclusively. Mom was out somewhere doing something, gone for several weeks at a time, and Miss Stauch, as a young child and a young woman and a teenager, was left in the care of these men. How do you deal with this? You're 6, you're 7 years old. What do you do? Physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. How does a kid handle that? Well, a lot of people that have had bad childhoods go on and they're fine. There's some that don't. Some is a survival mechanism. Some of these children's personalities fragment. And why do they do this? This fragmentation of the personalities when there's abuse at a young age. Because in the case of Ms. Stauch, her abuser was also the person that provided her means for survival. A 4, 5, 6-year-old kid does not go out and get a job and work and acquire their own food. pay the electric bill, pay the rent. So while they're being abused, they also, as a matter of survival, have to both hate and love, to fear and placate their abuser / caretaker. How does a person do that? Well, I think in a lot of situations, no one person can do that. That's where the fragmentation personality comes in. All the good and all the bad, all the evil and the hate can't reside in one place. And I know some of you, based on your jury questionnaires, think I'm telling some fanciful tale about this. I get it. I read the questionnaires. But as such, you have sworn an oath multiple times to follow the law and the evidence. Don't like insanity or dissociative identity disorder? That's okay. Joke or an excuse or not valid? That's okay. It's okay if you think that outside those doors. In here, you got to believe it's a legitimate mental health defense, that in fact it exists and that it is scientifically backed. You're going to hear doctors, sworn experts on both sides. So yeah, it's in the DSM-4 or 5, which is the book of psychological ailments and issues psychologists and psychiatrists use to diagnose things. It's listed accepted in the scientific community issue, a real issue, dissociative identity of multiple personalities. Now, whether you believe or their experts believe what our expert believes about whether it was present in this Stauch's case, different issue. But you must, to be fair, impartial, and unbiased, you must believe that it is a possible defense. It is a valid defense. It is a valid defect or disease of the mind that triggers the insanity provisions under the Colorado laws. Laws that trigger when we bring in some testimony or some evidence that there is insanity causes the rules, the laws to pivot. So that the prosecution has the burden of proving beyond a reasonable doubt let's say. In this case, circle back around. Why all of that just matters. Going back to motive. Evidence, exhibits, photos, videos. We're going to be in here for 8 weeks. School's going to be out. Making plans for our Labor Day barbecues, not Labor Day. Barbecues by the time we get done. But you know what you're probably not gonna hear? During all that time with all those exhibits, all that evidence. All those witnesses. You're not gonna hear about a motive. You're not gonna be given a motive about why Ms. Stauch. January 2020. Reason is, there is no motive. There is no reason. Doesn't make sense. It's insane. Smiling photo. Next day, Shannon's gone. No reason for it. Prosecution may say, oh, well. Makes it that more tragic that it was such a pointless death of Gannon. I don't know. I'm not going to speculate on that. But there was some major psychotic crack that went on during this time. Go from teacher, loving stepmother to 2 children, loving mother to her own child, Harley, a person that Shannon's father entrusted his own 2 kids, watched and loved and by this woman here. Being a killer of a 11-year-old boy, how do you get there? Big jump. There is no explanation for it. I don't have one. She broke on that day, ladies and gentlemen. She broke. Broke from all that was right. Made sense. And the axe, putting Shannon's body in a suitcase and traveling 1,300 miles, whole of Florida, and throwing the suitcase, Shannon's body in it, side of an overpass. Different stories she told. She was raped by somebody. Person who raped her kidnapped Gannon. Hear all the stories. The prosecution's going to play it for you. These are all signs and evidence of a mind, a soul that is broken, most fundamental and profound way. So broken, doesn't even know what it was doing. What was going through that person's head? The killer Gannon's head. Stauch's head. all the stab wounds, the shootings, the bruisings, the beatings, the burns. What was going through that person's head? I don't know. I don't know. I couldn't tell you. Or the person that she was killing that day, attacking. I wasn't Gannon. Wasn't Gannon to her. Wake up that day and go, I'm going to kill her. No. She was killing the demons. Her life from the dark depths of her childhood and her life. You're going to hear different doctors. We have a Dr. Dorothy Lewis. She's from Yale. She's been at it a long time. An MD, got a lot of experience with this. Her legal medical opinion is that on the date of this offense, Ms. Stauch was legally insane. Now, the prosecution is going to have some witnesses from our state mental hospital in Pueblo that I imagine are going to say, no, she was perfect. She knew what she was doing. It's normal behavior for a person to do that. Yeah, she had some mental issues and everything like that, but everybody does, but they don't know when you killed an 11-year-old boy. And that is true. A lot of people do have mental health issues. It was talked about in voir dire. Will have very severe mental health issues. They don't go out and kill people. They don't go out and kill 11-year-old boys or their stepsons. They had a nice hike just the day before, as evidenced by that photo. Don't stab the stepson dozens of times. Discharged 3 bullets of a 9mm handgun at the boy, hitting him once, killing him once. Beat him, burn him, and do all these other things you're going to hear about. Wrong, and it's horrible. She not saying. And she will be held accountable. Not guilty by reason and insanity. We'll get a jury instruction. It's about a paragraph long. It indicates in that case, and I think Judge Warner alluded to it, to one panel of potential jurists in the last couple of weeks. She's found guilty, then it's guilty. She's subject to regular sentencing by the court. But if I'm not guilty by reason of insanity, doesn't mean she walks out of here. She's committed to the state hospital, Colorado Department of Human Services, and they take over from there, the state mental hospital. That's not what we're dealing with here now. So I know there is a natural urge, human urge, a real urge. You hear about that little boy with that big bright smile that you saw on the screen. Hear about what happened to him. Want to make somebody pay. Want to make somebody pay yearly. Not right. Happened to that young. Awful. But not providing doubt constitutional protections for presumption of innocence, the right to remain silent, placing the burden of proof squarely on the shoulders of the prosecutor, letting bias or sympathy come in and cloud your judgment. Not going to bring Gannon back. Prejudging the case by what you've heard in the media. Do no good. No, we have a tragedy here. And we know it's terrible. But just listen to the evidence, as I started out with. Don't check out. It's going to be easy. Went into week 6, hearing all these witnesses and looking at evidence. You're going to want to check out. You're going to want to form your decision soon in this case. But you can't do that. For the next 6 to 8 weeks while we're in this trial, you can't form an opinion. Werner was telling you that. You're in an evidence gathering phase now. You're gathering the facts. Like Judge Werner's Miss Denver omelets. This is the ingredient gathering stage. Okay? It's in the cooking stage. When you go back to the jury room after all the evidence is in, you start putting the ingredients together. For omelet, or just a ham and cheese omelet. Whether you've got a guilty, not guilty, or not guilty by reason of insanity, based on the evidence, the ingredients. When you're in the jury room, that's when you start putting it together. Just writing down, taking notes, taking it all in. That's why the judge mentioned several times to you today, I don't want y'all talking about the case amongst yourselves. Kind of a special, hidden, quiet place, this courtroom, especially you jurors. Don't want y'all talking about the case because that leads to deliberating and judgment. It's in the judgment phase. So, thank you for your time. Thank you, everybody, for coming back. We'll be spending a lot of time together over the next couple months, so keep an open mind. Put a lot of the bad stuff out of your mind for now. What the prosecution has to say, hear what the defense has to say. At the end of this, as Mr. Allen said, when he's concluded his opening statement, he said, I'm going to come back in a couple months and ask you to find her guilty. I or Mr. Tellini in 2 months are going to ask you to find her not guilty by reason of insanity. Now the trial starts. Had opening statements, you've had all that now. He said, and I said, it's not evidence. Projected up on the board and the videos and the audios that he played. That's not evidence. Remember what the judge said. If you had to deliver a verdict right now, it's not guilty. Woman right here is not guilty. He's presumed innocent. Not telling you to like it. I'm just telling you that's the way it is. I'm going to stop now because I'm running out of steam. But I really, really, really do appreciate your time. I know the judge, days do, said earlier, you know, you're the ones that are making the sacrifice. You're the ones that, you know, are losing money because you're not able to go to work. That, you know, your workspaces, your offices are idle because you're going to be here for 2 months. What we do, this is where we work, all of us, the attorneys, we pay. They're the ones that make the sacrifice in this case. And I do appreciate it. And on behalf of my attorney, Mr. Tellini, I know he appreciates it. Thank you.
Todd, can you get the last perimeter light, please? I'm not sure which one it is. Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want to give you a little bit of roadmap as to what you can expect and where we go from here. As I said this morning, opening statements are not evidence. Their purpose is only to help you understand what the evidence will be. Keep in mind that in this case, as in every case, attorneys are paid advocates. Their job is to persuade you that evidence proves or does not prove a particular point. And as I said earlier, nothing an attorney says is evidence, and they do not take an oath to tell you the truth. Next, the prosecution will offer evidence. Evidence consists of the sworn testimony of the witnesses, the exhibits received in evidence, and stipulated, admitted, or judicially noticed facts.